Very good time. Thank you very much, Paul. Appreciate that. Okay. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, if there are people you know of who are having difficulty listening to the feed, please go ahead and try Gene's feed at unchainedradio.com. There's port 8000/listen.pls. You can also find a link at infidelguide.com right now as well, at the top left or top middle of the web page. All right. So, all right, Dan, please go ahead. You have 10 minutes.
Hi. Thanks, Reggie. And thank you, Paul. I'm glad you read so much of my book. Looks like you've been learning some things, Paul. If you write a book, I'll be happy to read yours as well. I understand that Paul was once a character in a musical that I wrote back in the 70s, a donkey or a horse or something. So, and I think it was great music. It was a lot of fun. The concepts are quite silly. This whole idea that you have to sacrifice an animal in order to pay for sins, which is in the Bible. It is, similar to previous pagan mythologies of bloodletting and violence and killing in order to appease the wrath of whoever was in charge, the king or the ruler. But I still like the music of those musicals and actually still getting royalties from them, which is a lot of fun. Christianity is not reasonable. It is not rational. You cannot make something rational by simply asserting that you can presuppose that your selected worldview is, by fiat, rational. I could do that with the worldview of my Native American ancestors, that some ducks were swimming on the water in the beginning, and one of the ducks swam down below the water and found some dirt and brought it up to the surface, and another duck then spit on it, and it made the continents, and it separated the waters, and therefore these ducks were the creator. I mean, I could presuppose that. I could presuppose that document and that myth, and we are created in the images of these ducks who were intelligent. Simply presupposing something to be true might be internally consistent. You can make all sorts of internally consistent arguments by presupposing anything, but that doesn't make it actually true. The only way we have ever found for something to be true is to check it out. So what does the word true mean? Truth is not a thing. Logic is not a thing. Morality is not a thing. Ethics is not a thing. Value is not a thing. It doesn't need a source. What they are functions of a brain or some type of thinking organism. A value is not something that you go out and find somewhere. We make a computational function within a brain of whether or not this item has value to us for survival reasons or reproductive reasons or pleasurable or whatever reasons. It is a mistake of many believers to assume that because we have a word for something, that therefore that thing must exist. You can presuppose it exists, I suppose, but the only way that we human beings have found to verify the truth value of a statement is by checking it out. By truth, we don't mean a thing with a capital T. By truth, I mean the degree with which a statement corresponds with reality. The only thing that can be true or false is a statement. You can't have a true table. You can say that table is good, and that's true, but you can't have a truth. Truth is not a thing out there that's a quality that applies to anything except a statement or a proposition. And the only way a proposition can be veridical, which means it can be true or false, is that statement must contain at least one reference to reality within it. If I were to say all bluebirds are quicklebops, and then I would presuppose that that's true, you would say, well, what are you talking about? You need to have one of those statements has to be rooted somehow in the world. You have to be able to say so we can check it out. So when you make a statement that has some reference, at least one reference to the real world, and you make some kind of either a value or a declarative statement about it, then you can check that statement out to see whether or not it corresponds. Some people don't think that correspondence admits of degrees or that truth doesn't admit of degrees. I don't know, but in any event, whether it corresponds or not is what we would call truth. And in most cases, truth is not absolute. If I say the sky is blue, most of you would say, well, okay, yeah, but it's actually blue only about 40% of the time. But we still understand that there's truth value to that statement. Even though we don't have 100% confidence in it, we can say that statement is a true statement. So atheism is the only rational, logical outcome of applying to the question of whether or not there's a God. Atheism is not a worldview on anything else. Atheism is not a political or moral or social worldview. Christianity pretends to be, but atheism, in one sense, like Paul quoted from my book, atheism is simply the absence of a belief in a God. Atheism is not a belief, and Jeff Lauder is right that there are differences of opinion among atheists, but he's wrong that this is a big problem, because atheists welcome and cherish the differences of opinion. I admit that I am both a lowercase atheist, which is the absence of belief in a God or gods in general, but at the same time, I am also an uppercase atheist with a capital A, a hard atheist, if you ask me about a particular God or gods. For example, when it comes to the God of the Bible, I am an uppercase atheist. I not only don't have a belief in that God, I claim to believe and know that that God does not exist for one of the very reasons that Paul gave, in that you can't have a married bachelor by definition. I'll give you just one brief example, but there are about a dozen that come to my mind. One example is omniscience and omnipotence. If there's a personal being who knows the future, who's all-powerful and omniscient, then that being knows its own future actions. That being knows what it's going to do tomorrow at 12 noon, and by knowing that, is unable to change that. That being's future is fixed. That being, there are limits put on what that being can do, because that being today, being omniscient, can't change what it knows it's going to do tomorrow at 12 noon. So that being cannot be a personal being. To be a personal being, you have to have options. You have to be able to make decisions. A being who is omniscient and personal cannot exist. It's like a married bachelor existing. If God goes ahead and changes his mind anyway to show how powerful he is, well, then he wasn't omniscient in the first place. And what you have is a being who's not personal, as Christians define God to be a personal being. You have something like a robot or a computer program or whatever. So that particular God, this doesn't disprove all gods, but this argument disproves that particular God with those particular characteristics. And I can say I am a positive, hard, capital A atheist in regards to that God. But in general, atheism is simply the absence of a belief in a God. Why do I not have a belief in a God? Because there's no evidence. There's no good argument for the God. There's no need for a God. We can live perfectly good, happy, moral, productive, joyful, meaningful lives without a God. Many of us do. Lives that are more happy, more meaningful, more joyful, more ethical than the lives of most Christians in the world, if you measure by any standard. And we don't base it on the image of a God whom we see in the Bible to be the antithesis of morality. His actions are so disrespectful of life. So, and then, of course, there's no coherent definition of a God. Logic and morality, the inductive, the problem, the so-called problem of induction, these are false problems. These are phony problems. You don't have to define or give a source for these things any more than you have to give a source for digestion. Digestion is one of the ways that a stomach functions. First, you have to have a stomach, and the stomach functions, and one of the functions of the stomach is to digest food. Digestion is not a thing out there that has to be justified for its existence. Digestion is just one of the things that a stomach does. Logic and reason and induction are not things that have to be justified or sources given for them. They are one or some of the ways that an organ called the brain functions properly. Even the simplest animals, at a simple level, at a primitive level, are using logic and reason. As data comes into their brains, they process that data and they make decisions based upon, they're not even conscious of it. We more conscious animals will sometimes formalize the logic and pretend like it's a big subject, and it is, to formalize the steps of how you would go from A to B to C, and to specify that A is not A, it's excluded middle, all those things, which is fun to do. But logic and induction and reasoning itself don't have to be justified. They don't even have to be presupposed. They are not things that you presuppose. You don't presuppose digestion. Digestion is the way the stomach works. So Paul is asking a non-question when he demands that we atheists somehow have to justify our presuppositions. In my book, I did not say that logic is a presupposition that atheists make. What I did say was that when we're going to solve an argument using logic, we have to first examine the underlying assumptions. A logic itself is not one of them.
Dan, time.
What's that?
Time.
Oh, time is up?
Yeah.
Well,
Sorry.
I think I basically said it all right there. Thank you.
All right. Okay, Paul?